March here.
The greatest movement in the history of our country. I'm fighting for you, and I love doing it with everything that I have. And I will never, ever stop. We are one people, one family, and one glorious nation under God. We will make America great again.
Welcome to Team Trump Online. From Washington, D.C., welcome to the 2020 Republican National Convention.
My fellow Americans, tonight, with a heart full of gratitude and boundless optimism, I profoundly accept this nomination for President of the United States.
Just imagine what 2020 would have looked like, fighting for your life without Donald Trump fighting for it too.
I watched him treat janitors, security guards, and waiters the same way he would treat a VIP. He made them feel special.
And this election will decide whether we will defend the American way of life or whether we will allow a radical movement to completely dismantle and destroy it. That won't happen.
The president did what he said he would do. He took action.
But I have news for Joe Biden. We are free. We are free people with free minds.
My hope for America is that formerly incarcerated people will be afforded the opportunity to take advantage of the fact that we live in a nation of second chances.
As I grant John, I'm not sure you know this, a full pardon. So I don't know if you know that, Jamie.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
You're now fellow citizens of the greatest nation on the face of God's earth. Congratulations. We have spent the last 4 years reversing the damage Joe Biden inflicted over the last 47 years. Biden's record is a shameful roll call of the most catastrophic betrayals and blunders in our lifetime. He has spent his entire career on the wrong side of history.
Our daughter Kayla was taken as a hostage and murdered by ISIS.
We endured an agonizing back and forth between us, the Obama administration, and ISIS. We put all our faith in the government, but the government let us down. President Obama refused to meet with us until ISIS had already beheaded other Americans. To this day, we've never heard from Joe Biden.
And this election will decide whether we will defend the American way of life or whether we will allow a radical movement to completely dismantle and destroy it. That won't happen.
And after watching tonight, I said, I'm going to wait for debates, but I'm not. I mean, I have made up my mind. I am definitely going to go for, Donald Trump.
Joe Biden's agenda is made in China. My agenda is made in the USA. When I took bold action to issue a travel ban on China very early indeed, Joe Biden called it hysterical and xenophobic. If we had listened to Joe, hundreds of thousands more Americans would have died. At the Democrat convention, you barely heard a word about their agenda. But that's not because they don't have one. It's because their agenda is the most extreme set of proposals ever put forward by a major party nominee.
Welcome to the 2020 Democratic National Convention.
Why can't folks imagine a world without the cops? Why can't folks imagine a world without prisons?
I've never felt American.
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible.
One nation, indivisible.
With liberty and justice for all. Someday.
This is the most important election in the history of our country. There has never been such a difference between two parties or two individuals in ideology, philosophy, or vision than there is right now. Our opponents believe that America is a depraved nation.
No miracle is coming.
We want our sons and daughters to know the truth. America is the greatest and most exceptional nation in the history of the world. In America, we don't turn to government to restore our souls. We put our faith in Almighty God. What united generations past was an unshakable confidence in America's destiny and an unbreakable faith in the American people. Over the next 4 years, we will prove worthy of this magnificent legacy. We will reach stunning new heights. There is no one like us on earth. Americans have steel in their spines, grit in their souls, and fire in their hearts. For America, nothing is impossible. For America, there is a dream, and it is not beyond your reach. And we will make America greater than ever before. I love you all. God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you very much. And now we're opening, and we're opening with a bang. And today's announcement proves that our economy is roaring back. It's coming back extremely strong. The United States economy added almost 5 million jobs. Likewise, Hispanic employment is up by 1.5 million jobs. 3 million more women were employed in the month of June. This is better than a V. This is a rocket ship.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to MAGAnomics. I'm Steve Cortes, Senior Advisor to President Trump's re-election campaign. With me tonight are Maine lobsterman Captain Joyce and Wisconsin dairy farmer Chris Peterson. Our great guests will be joining us later in the show, but first, we need to talk about the Republican National Convention this past week and how the Republican agenda for American growth contrasted starkly with Joe Biden's dour assessment for our nation. While the Democrats only offer grievance and globalism, our movement offers patriotism and prosperity. 2 weeks ago, Joe Biden and the Democrats painted a grim picture of America, an almost dystopian vision of doom and doubt. In their dark worldview, America's past represents something shameful, and our national future represents an America of limited potential, where, at best, America will keep pace as one of several equal powers in the world. But this defeatism is unbecoming of Americans. We embrace challenges, even ones as unwelcome as this current pandemic. And in spite of hurdles, from war to natural disasters to viruses, we Americans persevere to launch dazzling new technologies, build new companies, and find solutions to seemingly intractable problems. We recognize that American prosperity will be constrained only by the policy limits we place upon our economic and innovation engine. Ours is the nation that split the atom, broke the sound barrier, revolutionized personal computing, and leads the 21st century's digital innovations. As President Trump rightly asserted in his RNC acceptance speech, we understand that America is not a land cloaked in darkness. America is the torch that enlightens the entire world. A few weeks earlier, at his Mount Rushmore address, President Trump correctly declared that our founding in 1776 represented the culmination of thousands of years of Western civilization. A key element of this American exceptionalism that we should celebrate involves the economic power of our nation. Because of our principles of enterprise, our culture of risk-taking, and our elevation of individual initiative, we have built generations of prosperity in this blessed land. In recent years, our economy has been the envy of the world. Before the China virus artificially halted the global economy, America added a whopping 7 million jobs to the economy under President Trump's leadership. And these jobs were quality positions, as the economic underdogs, the strivers, vaulted to the lead of wage acceleration. The very working class people who had so badly lagged during the slow growth Obama-Biden years leaped to the front of income gains under President Trump, the president for workers. Today, as our nation climbs quickly back from the shock of the virus crisis, in just the last 3 months, our country has added an astounding 9.3 million jobs. President Trump leads an unprecedented economic rebirth. In contrast, Joe Biden has spent his 47 years as a career politician shipping America's jobs away with terrible globalist trade deals like NAFTA and the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Deals that President Trump had to either renegotiate or outright cancel. Biden represents a giant move backwards, a regression to globalism. Acquiescing to a losing worldview where America is just one of many important powers and multilateral organizations like the WHO and the WTO determine our destiny. Joe Biden is the anointed water boy for Team Globalism. Consequently, most of the crony elites of big business and big government back his candidacy. They ascertain a chance to reverse the gains of the America First movement and our policies of economic nationalism. President Trump summed it up best in his acceptance speech at the White House last week. For 47 years, Joe Biden took the donations of blue-collar workers, gave them hugs and even kisses, and told them he felt their pain. And then he flew back to Washington and voted to ship our jobs to China and many other distant lands. Joe Biden is the best friend that Beijing could ever ask for in Washington. He sold out America in 2001 as a leading Senate proponent of China's full inclusion into the World Trade Organization and full status as a most favored nation to trade with America. He did not recognize or did not care that the Chinese Communist Party is not and never will be a trading partner. They are a trade exploiter. Joe's sellout to the CCP caused 60,000 American factories to close. The total job losses to China in the ensuing years cost a staggering 3.2 million American workers to lose their jobs directly to China. These Americans were not outsmarted or outworked by Chinese labor. Instead, these salt-of-the-earth Americans lost out in a rigged game of abusive and unfair trade practices that Beijing imposed upon places like Beloit, Wisconsin, with the willing complicity of sellouts like Joe Biden. Senator Tom Cotton articulated Beijing-Biden's relationship with the Chinese Communist Party best when at the RNC he stated, quote, Joe Biden aided and abetted China's rise for 50 years with terrible trade deals that closed our factories and laid off our workers. Folks, here's the cold reality. Joe Biden shipped millions of American jobs to China. And what did the Chinese Communist Party send us back in return? The virus. Don't just take my word for it. Debbie Flood, an owner of a small metals manufacturing business in Wisconsin, perfectly explained how Joe Biden's disastrous trade deals with China destroyed jobs throughout America. At the RNC, she stated, quote, when we lost nearly 50% of our business to China in the mid-2000s, we wondered how a small company like ours could continue to compete. At that time, Joe Biden was a senator. He voted to normalize trade with China and helped pave the way for them to join the WTO, even though they were hurting American companies like ours. What Joe Biden did to our nation is inexcusable. People like Debbie Flood paid the price, while people like Biden's son Hunter reaped the rewards of financial largesse from the CCP. But China now faces an American leader of clear-eyed resolve and toughness. President Trump has refused to cower to China. We also recognize that America first does not mean America alone. Foreign trade on fair and reciprocal terms can benefit all sides in international commerce. Consequently, President Trump renegotiated our agreement with our neighbors and allies, Canada and Mexico, replacing the outdated and unfair NAFTA with the new USMCA. This time, we negotiated by prioritizing American workers and secured a deal where 176,000 jobs will be coming back to America. This trade pact is a template for more such agreements in the second Trump term. Even China recognizes Trump's resolve. He placed billions of dollars worth of tariffs on Beijing, compelling their agreement to a phase one trade deal. Under this agreement, China promises to buy at least $200 billion in increased imports of America's goods and services. As President Trump has made clear, we will not just hold China accountable on trade, but also regarding the coronavirus. The CCP knowingly sickened the planet. They lied about human-to-human transmission in the earliest days of the virus in Wuhan. They sealed that city off from the rest of China, but allowed large-scale travel from Wuhan to the rest of the world, including America. They crashed the global economy and infected the world. President Trump will make China pay for what they have done. But despite what China did, America is booming once again. And what we see in the data proves it. There is a real economic rebirth in our country right now, even if the Democrats and their allies in the corporate media refuse to acknowledge it. The S&P 500 stock index just touched an all-time record high of 3,500 points. This rally in stocks reflects the surge in Main Street confidence as well. For example, the Associated Builders and Contractors of America just recently endorsed President Trump. They have every reason to be thrilled with the trajectory of housing right now. After all, according to the National Association of Realtors, existing home sales increased 24.7% in July, the largest monthly gain in the survey's history. July durable goods orders increased by an astounding 11%, smashing Wall Street expectations. Much of this surge emanates from soaring automobile sales, up an incredible 22% for the month. Apparently, a lot of Americans want new cars to park in the new homes that they're buying. This kind of optimism drives a clear trend, a V-shaped economic recovery. Our economy roars back, and the flurry of recent economic numbers gives solid, objective reasons to believe that we will soon regain the heights of the Trump boom that we enjoyed as recently as the beginning of this year. A lot of work still lies ahead, but economically speaking, it's morning in America. At this critical time of economic renaissance, the last thing America needs is Joe Biden inflicting the largest tax increase in American history upon our nascent rebuild. Joe proposes a mind-numbing $4 trillion in punishing new taxes, twice as much as anything Hillary Clinton proposed. Americans understand this reality, which explains why in the latest Wall Street Journal NBC News poll, Americans report by a wide 10% margin that they trust Donald Trump to handle the economy rather than Joe Biden. On this show, we talk about the economy from a macro perspective, from 30,000 feet as it were, but then we also dive into the micro level. What is happening with businesses in America, especially the small and medium-sized firms that form the backbone of not just a strong economy, but of strong communities too. So, to get a firsthand read on the economy from the practitioners out there making it happen, let's hear from two patriotic Americans, inspiring business owners helping to reignite the economic engine of America. But first, short commercial break. We'll be back right after this.
As we have already seen, his America First agenda has lifted all Americans up and have empowered them with true economic emancipation that has once again made the American dream possible. That's why I want you to text EMPOWER to 88022 right now if you want to keep America great and deliver 4 more years for President Donald J. Trump.
Kamala Harris ran for president by rushing to the radical left, embracing Bernie's plan for socialized medicine, calling for trillions in new taxes, attacking Joe Biden for racist policies. Voters rejected Harris. They smartly spotted a phony. But not Joe Biden. He's not that smart. Biden calls himself a transition candidate. He is handing over the reins to Kamala while they jointly embrace the radical left. Slow Joe and phony Kamala. Perfect together. Wrong for America.
Welcome back. I'm Steve Cortes, and my first guest tonight is Maine lobsterman Captain Jason Joyce. Captain Joyce, welcome to the show, and let's just get this right out of the way. I'm kind of jealous because I'm sitting here in a sterile TV studio, and there you are. I know you're not just enjoying yourself. I know it's your workplace, but there you are at the ocean, fantastic background, a man at work in a pretty cool setting.
Well, it's good to be with you, Steve.
I appreciate it. So listen, Captain Joyce, I do want to ask you a lot about your profession and your journey as an entrepreneur and business owner. But before we get into that, I want to get your thoughts on the Republican National Convention from last week. What did you think of President Trump's message for the American people? And what can you tell us about your experience speaking at the Republican National Convention?
Well, I watched his speech on the night that he spoke, and it was very positive. I've watched what Joe Biden said. Some of the things that some of the Democrats are saying, it's not the Democratic Party that was there even 20 years ago. Definitely not the Democratic Party of 50 years ago. But President Trump had an uplifting message. I mean, we have so much negativity in the news now. You had all the negativity of attacking each other back during the hearings that they had, the impeachment trial that they tried, which proved nothing. And then you had COVID for the last 4 months that all we see is, well, so many people died, these many people infected, everybody's scared half to death. And so it was nice to see a positive message. And I think it spoke to your average American. It doesn't matter blue collar, white collar. We want what's best for this country. So it was a good message. I liked it.
Right. Fantastic. It's interesting. You mentioned a couple things there that I think are important. Number one is the Democratic Convention, rather than being a celebration of America, it was largely a condemnation of our country. And that's not what we expect. It's not what we want out of our political parties and political conventions. But you also mentioned impeachment. It's fascinating to me that as obsessed as the Democrats and their corporate media allies were about impeachment, it was not mentioned one single time at the Democratic Convention, which I think is very telling. But our convention did celebrate the American story, and a critical part of the American story is people like you as entrepreneurs. So I'd like to hear about your own individual stories. So please tell us about what you do as a lobsterman. What are the struggles your business has seen in prior administrations before Donald Trump?
Well, I'm an 8th generation lobsterman. My family, on my dad's side, my family first moved to Swans Island in 1806. Family's always been involved with lobsters. Back in the 1800s, lobstering was the industry. This guy was making a noise. Just a second. Back in the 1800s, for that first 100 years, most people would get into the industry. It was how you got into fishing and how you retired. And then for the middle of your career, you went to sea. But for the last 40 years, especially the last 30 years, a lot of guys have depended just on lobstering. And majority of my income has always come from lobstering. I've been lobstering now for full time for 31, 32 years. I'm 50 now. So when I get out of high school, I went right into lobstering. Did other fisheries as well. But in past administrations, the success and the failure of our fishery sometimes is triggered through economics, and sometimes there are other things. I mean, the catch may be slow. One thing that you'll never hear reported is last year our catch was down a lot in the month of July. The reason being is at the end of June, our water temperature was 5 degrees colder than it was in 2018. You never hear that anywhere. All you ever hear is, wow, the Gulf of Maine is warming up faster and faster. And you can swear by listening to them that the lobsters will come up all red and cooked, and that things are changing so quickly. But you have and what they're talking about is they talk about, over a 100-year span, I think there's going to be a percentage, 1% of a degree of Celsius that everything is going to go up. Well, in 1 year, it dropped 5 degrees. Well, the molt, so when a lobster sheds, that shedding process or that molting process is triggered by water temperature. So some years, if our catch is down, it's because the water temperature is so cold. If it doesn't get warm enough, it doesn't trigger the molt. So that has an effect that has nothing to do with any administrations or anything like that. But we have seen, since President Trump has been in there, a strong economy brings about a celebratory sort of feeling amongst the consumer. If they're doing well, they don't want to go eat bologna, they want to eat lobster. So we've enjoyed high prices up until this year because people were buying lobster because the economy is doing good. As a business, I buy fuel. In 2008, when we had the economic collapse, fuel prices were horrible. I was paying $5, I think at the peak, $5.60 for a gallon of diesel fuel. Well, now I'm at $2.30 a gallon. So it helps that our country is a leading provider of supplier of fuel around the country.
Sure.
So that's good. And like I said, if you have a consumer base that is doing well, then usually that increases our demand. This year is not so good, and it has nothing to do with the president, but it has to do with the COVID and all of these restaurants being shut down. By being shut down, that reduced demand. So we're off by $1 a pound. So if you catch, your average lobsterman will catch between, I'll say 25 to 75,000 pounds a year. That means that small business, that family is going to make $25 to $75,000 less for this year. And we're kind of prepared for that. But, you take the ups and downs. But having President Trump there for these last 3 years has been positive. The economy doing better has helped us.
Right. You mentioned that you're an 8th generation, which is pretty incredible. We don't see that a whole lot in the United States where somebody is an 8th generation in their profession and in their vocation and in much of anything. It's pretty incredible that you are as a lobsterman. And I wanted to ask you, Bob, because in your RNC speech to the nation, you did talk about how the extreme environmental left held a lot of sway over previous administrations, the Obama administration in particular, and that folks like you are the actual best stewards of the environment. That people, for example, who are outdoorsmen for sport, hunters and fishermen, or people who do it for a living like you, are the best stewards of the environment. And unfortunately, your input was neglected previous to President Trump. Isn't that right?
Oh, that's correct. I mean, we have the best data. We have the best science backs us up. The catch is strong because all of the regulations that are out there on lobsters, I don't know how other fisheries are run, but with lobsters, well, I do know how other fisheries are run, and I don't want to dump on anybody else. But in regards to lobster, all of the regulation have come from the fishermen. We approach state government, they work with us, and they'll enact something. So the first law was back in the 1800s. It was around 1870, and the first law was a great one. It said no one from out of the state of Maine can catch lobster. So that was very popular. But then the next law, which was about 20 years later, was limiting the size. And so all of the things that we've done have been to, back before it was popular, before you had these big environmental groups, we know that to sustain a fishery, to have it for the next generation, we have to be good stewards of it. So we don't take breeding females. We mark the breeding females, so they're illegal to keep. We don't take lobsters over 5 inches on the carapace. So this length right here is called a carapace. Anything bigger than that, we throw it back. It's a breeding lobster. Same thing with the egged lobsters, and then smaller lobsters. We don't keep those. So our fishery has done well because we've taken care of that fishery. But the environmentalists in the last 30 years, 20 years, we have a society now that is more. People go to a store and they buy meat, which comes in a package. They don't realize that came from a cow. And so, unfortunately, we have a generation of people that don't realize what's involved with this. And so they see a cause put out there by name your environmental group. But they put out a cause. And what they do have right now is they have a cause, which is they are working through the court system to sue the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration to further regulate lobster fishermen in the Northeast, Maine lobster fishermen, and make things more difficult to us because of a declining right whale population, which actually, the declining right whale population, I'm sorry, I've opened up a whole thing, but I'll go on for a little bit more. So in the whole scheme of things, the northern right whale is endangered. It was endangered with less than 300 whales at the beginning of the 90s. We went through a series of workshops in which Maine fishermen came up with breakaways, sinking ropes, a bunch of different things to help with that. We had one entanglement at the beginning of 2002 with no deaths. And other than that, we've had nothing for the Gulf of Maine. Well, in 2017, in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, the Canadians, they haven't done the same measures we have. And nothing against them. They run their own fisheries the way they want. But unfortunately, they had 17 right whales die up there. And in the course of a year, the United States fishermen were allowed to actively not participate, but to have a hand in only 0.7 or 0.9 deaths per year. And if a death happens in Canada, we get blamed for half of that death. So when they had 17 deaths, we were blamed for 8.5 of them, which exceeded 16 times what we were supposed to do. So from that, the environmental groups, there's 4 environmental groups and some nutcase in Massachusetts, have filed suit against the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And this is going through the court system. It's in federal court. This one case is filed in federal court in Bangor, Maine. The other court case is filed down in DC. But the environmentalists are using this and using us, which we have no, like I said, everything that we've done has been positive. The population went up to over 500. Like I said, no entanglements, no deaths here to the state of Maine. And so anyways, boiling this all down, we have in Joe Biden, everybody knows it, but that's where the environmentalists have hitched that's the wagon that the environmentalists have hitched, that's the horse that environmentalists have hitched their wagon to.
Right.
And so when I see him if he gets elected, they don't care about the coastal communities. They don't care about this community behind me that's been here for 300 plus years. They care about raising money, and they will turn my community of 370 year-round residents into a seasonal community because they're very hard to work with. And like I said, we're the environmentalists. If we were doing something to hurt any sort of other industry or any species, we work with the state government and we fix it. And right now we've been doing great, but they have brought this lawsuit, which will negatively affect us.
Sure. Well, and to your point, one thing we've been really adamant about here at the Trump campaign is that, you're right when you said that the radicals are hitching their wagon to Joe Biden. I think in a lot of ways they're not just hitching it, they're actually driving the wagon. they're driving the bus, as it were, regarding policy for Joe Biden. I wanted to ask you about, because you mentioned the weak demand, unfortunately, because of the COVID situation, and the fact that a lot of restaurants are either not operating or not operating at full tilt. And that has, of course, reduced demand for products like yours. Joe Biden has threatened to shut down America again. He has also threatened a nationwide mandatory mask mandate, including people who are outside. So you fishing on your boat alone, according to Joe Biden, will have to wear a mask for 3 months. Does it worry you that those kinds of threats from Biden, in an era where we're learning to live with COVID and where businesses are reopening in really safe ways and the economy's starting to gain its footing again, does it worry you that Joe Biden, and particularly for your business in regard to restaurants, that he could shut all that down again with catastrophic results?
Yes. In regards to your last statement of the environmentalists pushing him and hitching that wagon to him as a horse, I would say that they're on him as a horse and they're whipping his rear end, trying to crack him to go faster. As regards to COVID, just a second. Yeah, he said he knows more about COVID and the prevention of it than Joe Biden does. It's ludicrous to think. It's sad in a sense. I see Joe Biden doing what he's doing. He obviously is, I don't think his mental facilities or faculties are completely there. I think he's being used. And I think any Democrat actually who sees that should be disgusted with the fact that their party is pushing that man forward, when I don't think, if it comes to a debate, it'll be sad. Because Donald Trump's going to do what he's going to do. We can't have a guy in charge that can't even keep a conversation. It's going to be awful, and I think the American people are going to see that. But anyways, I can't remember what your question was because I'm just rattling on.
It was about the COVID, but I think you answered it. Absolutely. That we can't have it. a new shutdown. Right. Listen, last question for you, Captain, because I know you got to get to work. And again, I'm jealous of your work environment. But last question for you. You mentioned in your speech at the Republican convention that you were not initially a Trump supporter in 2016. Clearly, you've been won over now and you are on board. What would you tell other undecided voters, or you're not undecided, what would you tell undecided voters right now who might be on the fence and who could be convinced to support the president? What would be your message for them?
Well, I mean, people who supported Hillary, I would say, have you really gone to the point in your decision making that you can support a party that used to enforce the law, that used to support the rule of law, and our first responders? Can you support anyone that is running with that party? I mean, how can anybody in their right mind? I mean, I have friends who are Democrats, friends who are independents. I don't see how you can. I mean, I look at the violence going on. I mean, you defund the police, and then you expect people to raise families in cities where there are people out there. It doesn't matter if you're white, brown, green. I mean, my mom is from Kauai, so I've got Filipino and Portuguese blood in me. So I'm about as minority as we get around here. I've never been treated different. Everyone's always treated me like American. I've always felt like I'm an American. I've never been, and I understand some places in the country may not be like that, but that's crazy. But what I represented as far as with my vote, I wouldn't vote for Hillary because I think she's a crook. But I'm conservative, so I would say I represent voters who were fearful that the president wouldn't do anything conservative. Mm-hmm. And wouldn't do anything socially conservative. I'm pro-life, and I look at his past. It looked like he was pro-choice at one time, and I'm like, that's a core conviction. It's a core conviction with me. But he's appointed judges that I think he hopes would uphold the Constitution, which should be protecting life. And so any other things that he's done, I've seen his votes and his stance on lower court judges. And like I mentioned in my speech, by moving, I did some research on moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Bill Clinton was the first one said he was going to do it in 93. In 1999, there was a bill passed that said we had to move our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Everybody, including George Bush, which I'm disappointed with, every president has signed every 6 months a little paper to kick that down the road, and Trump's the only one that's had the guts to do it. So in my opinion, he's got the guts to stand up and do what's right, and I think it's great, and I'm hoping Maine's fishermen, and I'm hoping fishermen throughout the Northeast and through the country will see that. Boy, I tell you what, if Biden gets in there, the government's going to be on our back, and we have a friend now in the White House, and all we ask is for things to be fair, but the environmental groups are just they're savage on people who are out, the hunter-gatherers in industries like that, and the farmers. Like you're going to hear in your next segment, the environmentalists. I mean, these are people that think that a cow's fat is going to destroy the earth. So you put that into perspective. If that's what you're going to vote for president, don't be surprised at what you get.
Right. Understood. Captain, listen, thank you. Your voice is critical. Your business is critical to this country. Appreciate everything you're doing out there. Folks, we'll be right back after this.
Thank you.
We know you want to give Donald Trump 4 more years to fight for you in Washington, but he isn't just up against Joe Biden. He's up against the Democrat fundraising machine, and he needs all the help he can get. Don't just assume because his opponent hasn't completed a single sentence that this campaign is over. Crazy things happen, like this woman becoming Speaker of the House. Support the president today by texting Trump to 88022. Donald Trump is counting on every single one of his supporters to text Trump to 88022 now.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message. I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
Welcome back to MAGAnomics. I'm Steve Cortes, and I'm joined now by Wisconsin dairy farmer Chris Peterson. Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to join us this evening.
Hi, Steve. I'm very glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. So, Chris, you spoke at the Republican National Convention last week. And for those who might have missed it, I don't know why they would have, but for those who might have missed it, can you touch on what you spoke about and what was the experience like?
Well, I'm going to start with the experience. It was amazing. I love Washington. It was a huge surprise. And I'm a dairy farmer from northern Wisconsin. And the reason I was asked to come and speak at the convention, I think, is because we have a unique story. We're a sixth generation dairy farm out in the flyover country. And basically, my message was that President Trump, for the first time, I'm really old, and for the first time in my whole life, we have a president that talks about our farmers, and he talks about agriculture, and he validates the importance of agriculture. And so my story was basically just what's happened to our farm and how the Trump administration has affected our prosperity.
Right. Well, I don't often disagree with guests on my show. I'm going to disagree with you when you say you're old. You're not old.
Well, I'm old enough.
Regarding farmers, I do want to ask you about that because I find it fascinating. You talk about the president's respect. He has so much respect for all kinds of enterprise, for all the small business folks, for all the entrepreneurs out there in America. But he does, for somebody who lived on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, he has a great appreciation and a great understanding of farmers. And when you say that, I couldn't help but think back to Michael Bloomberg. And I realize he's not the Democratic nominee, but he's a huge power player within the Democratic Party. And I don't know if you saw when he was in one of his appearances incredibly dismissive of farmers. He said that, well, they just, make a little hole in the ground, put some seeds in, and up come the plants, as if that's the totality of farmers. And in reality, and I'd like for you to expound upon this if you would, Chris, farming is an incredibly sophisticated business that requires all kinds of disparate knowledge to come together to create the products that our country literally needs to survive. So can you speak to that aspect of the complexity of farming?
I can speak to that aspect. In fact, you probably opened Pandora's box. I was born and raised in Minneapolis. And then I married this cute farmer and moved 70 miles north into Wisconsin. And I was young, I was just out of college. And I was just horrified and dumbfounded at how difficult it was, how complicated it was to get milk out of cows. It was like, seriously, we have to worry about the weather. We have to grow crops. We have to fix machinery. We have to worry about the cow health. It's stinky. It's dirty. I got this tremendous chip on my shoulder about that nobody understands where their food comes from. I spent the last 25 years writing children's books on agriculture to help kids and their parents understand the complexity of food production. And what most people think is that we should be, what the environmentalists think is that we should have maybe 6 cows and wear blue overalls and have red barns. And that's serious. If you look at all the children's books that you read to your little kids, there's still lots of them that are published that are just that whole old McDonald sense of what farming is supposed to be. And you're right, it's a risky, complicated, really difficult business. And it takes a lot of money to do it.
No, it sure does. And I'll tell you this, I come from farmers on both sides. Both my mom and dad grew up on farms. In my dad's case, it was a cattle ranch in Latin America. In my mom's case, it was a grain farm in Indiana. And I have just enormous respect from both of them, certainly, for the business you're in. And I also will tell you from my professional career, before I got into politics, I spent 25 years on Wall Street trading desks. And some of the most astute traders out there in America are farmers. You want to talk about people who understand financial markets. There's a lot of farmers who have a more keen understanding than a lot of Wall Street traders do about where interest rates are heading, obviously where grain prices are heading, all that sort of thing. So you have a difficult job, and it's a job that's important not just to the economy, but also to our national security in this country, because our country, thankfully, unlike most places in the world, is food self-sufficient. But I want to ask you about Wisconsin, about your home state, because it seems as though Joe Biden has basically forgotten about the state of Wisconsin. He has not been there physically in over 670 days. So what signal does that send to you? What does it send to Wisconsinites that he hasn't been there in that long? And how does that differ from President Trump's message?
Well, it's interesting that you should ask that, because I had no idea. When I said that I would come and do this speech, I had no idea I was going to, people were going to be interviewing me and I'd be on radio and all this stuff this past week. And it's been just crazy. And so I had this one guy that called me wanted to do a Skype interview, and he was a young man and is living in New York, but he was, not New York, I'm sorry, Washington, D.C., and he's based in Wisconsin. And I all of a sudden realized that this was probably a liberal thing that was calling me and was going to try to fight with me a little bit. And when he came on, I looked at him, I smiled, and I said, "You're going to be nice to me, aren't you?" And he said, "Well, the first thing I want to ask is, the Democrat convention was supposed to be in Milwaukee." And he said, they didn't have anybody from Wisconsin in the Democrat convention. And he said, on the night that you were on, there were 2 people from Wisconsin. And I looked at him and I smiled and I said, I think he did that on purpose. I think that Donald Trump actually really cares about all of us and he's a lot smarter than people think he is. And he's got good advisors. And I think he's just out there knowing what he strategically needs to do to reach out to the people in each state and make us feel like we are at the center of his policies. And no one ever does that. It's never that way. I don't care if it's a Republican. I've been a Republican my whole life. I dropped Goldwater leaflets on doorsteps when I was in 6th grade. So I watched this. I've been a very political family my whole life, and there's nobody that has kept his promises like Donald Trump. Nobody. Ever.
Right. I call him President Promise Keeper, and I don't just say that as a slogan. I mean, it is just the truth. I think that's part of why, by the way, the Washington establishment so despises him, is because he broke all the rules to the game. One of the rules is supposed to be you make all kinds of campaign promises and then you toss most of them aside when it comes to actually governing. And this president, this outsider, this entrepreneur in chief came in and said, no, I actually meant everything I said. And we're going to institute it in actual policy, and it drives the Beltway people, absolutely crazy. So you told us, Chris, a bit about your personal story and how you were a city slicker turned into a farm girl through love initially, but then you came to love the business. And I wanted to ask you too then about how did you come then from your background as a dairy farmer to actually speaking at the RNC? What were the steps that led to that?
Well, in November 2017, we had a catastrophic barn fire that destroyed our milking facility. All the cows survived. There were about 800 cows. And the barn was 120 years old and had been built by my husband's great-grandfather. It was just heartbreaking. On that day, people from all over northern Wisconsin, friends, farmers, complete strangers, came with their trailers and hauled by 10, took those cows off to other farms to be taken care of until we could rebuild. And it was all over the news. It was a big fire, very dramatic, and a lot of filming of it. The Twin Cities, all the stations came to talk about it. And the cool part when they came in and reported on this fire was that they didn't talk about, what the tragedy of the farm or whatever. They talked about how all these people came to help us and how the community just it was just so humbling and so amazing. And that story, my son, a year later, when we finished our rebuild, he did an 11-minute YouTube video called Four Cubs Farm Fire Recovery. And it ended up getting to the White House because I had talked to a staffer of our congressman and it got into the White House somehow. And it is quite the video, a little bit too much tearing up cement and whatever, but it's really a good video. And he just did it on the fly right before we had this party to thank all of our people for helping us and I got a call from the White House the next day, and they wanted us to come to New Orleans and be, how the president has people that are kind of his props at different speeches. And he wanted us to come to the Farm Bureau convention in New Orleans, and we got to meet him, and he told the story of our farm and the fire and all that good stuff. And we had our picture taken with him. And so after that, I had an inside email at the White House. And when the COVID crackdown or shutdown came, about 3 weeks later, we were all in a panic. And I emailed this inside the White House email and told her, I said, listen, it's really bad out here and our food system is going to collapse if something doesn't happen. You got to let people know it's really bad. Because it would have, it was, everything was breaking down. And when they were going to do what they did this last week, this woman that I had emailed suggested to the president, why don't you have Chris Peterson speak? That's how I got there.
No, it's fantastic. I mean, the story, by the way, about how people, friends and neighbors helped you at your time of need is fantastic. But then also on a national level, your story about how the president helped this entire country to get back on its feet through things like Paycheck Protection Program and a lot of other assistance, which this country desperately needed to make sure that we could stay on our feet so that we could begin the economic recovery, which I'm really happy to report is now proceeding with gusto in this country. We still have a lot of work to do, but all of the recent economic signs that we've been talking about a lot on this show are extremely, extremely optimistic. So, Chris, I want to ask you the same question that I asked Captain Jason. For people who are on the fence, you're obviously committed to supporting President Trump. What would you tell people, your neighbors in Wisconsin? It's going to be a key state, or folks in Minnesota nearby you. Also, I think a key state that I believe we're going to flip this time. But for undecided folks or people who are maybe leaning toward the president but unsure, what would you tell them to convince them, to persuade them that they should vote Trump?
I would have asked them if they can look in the mirror and ask themselves, do they hate Donald Trump more than they love their country? And this is a big deal. And when all the environmental stuff that Jason said was, I just was out here kind of cheering and clapping my hands, because we have the same issues in agriculture and in dairy with environmental regulations and stuff that is totally just out, and it's just insane. And people just don't think what we're doing is very important, but this food production is everything. And if you really hate Donald Trump more than you love your country, well, I just don't think that's the case for most people. But there's the stories that are coming out in the liberal media are so insane and crazy. And Donald Trump, sure, he does goofy tweets, and I'm not going to say anything more than that, but I mean, he could drive people, they just want to tear their hair out. But he keeps his promises. That's the deal. He keeps his promises and he makes a difference. And I really believe that he will be reelected.
And, Chris, keeping his promises is also one of the reasons I mentioned how mad it makes the Washington establishment. Yeah. Part of that establishment, let's face it, is the corporate media in this country, because most legacy media organizations, whether it's print, online, broadcast news, let's face it, most of them act effectively as the de facto PR, public relations arm of the DNC. And that's just the reality. And that's why shows like this are so important, because we have to go directly to the people and get the message and the truth out. And Chris, you're just a critical part of that. This was so fun. This was sort of agriculture food production day on MAGAnomics show today. And both iconic businesses, dairy in Wisconsin and lobster fishing and lobstermen from Maine. It was fantastic. Chris, so appreciate you being our guest today.
Thanks so much for having me. I just loved it.
You bet. Folks, we'll be right back.
Joe Biden has embraced the policies of the radical left. Trillions in new taxes, crushing middle-class families.
If you elect me, your taxes are going to be raised, not cut.
Amnesty for 11 million illegal immigrants.
Citizenship for 11 million undocumented folks.
Reducing police funding.
Yes. Absolutely.
The radical left has taken over Joe Biden and the Democratic Party. Don't let them take over America.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message. I need you to stand with me right now and show the fake news and their partner, the Democrats, that no matter what they throw at us, we will keep fighting, and we will keep winning, and we will make America great again.
Welcome back. Here's how you can get involved. Download the new groundbreaking Trump 2020 app, now available on Apple and Android. To stay in contact with us, please text Trump to 88022. If you or your friends, family, or neighbors want to be involved in our fight to re-elect President Donald J. Trump, please visit armyfortrump.com to sign up. We would like to thank our amazing guests today, Captain Jason Joyce and Chris Peterson, for joining us. And a special thank you to all of our amazing supporters watching at home. We'll see you again next time on MAGAnomics.
Trump campaign is now reaching voters online.
You are seeing the President of the United States. Look at the lines.
You joined our movement.
A lot of President Trump supporters
The
here.
greatest movement in the history of our country. I'm fighting for you, and I love doing it with everything that I have. And I will never, ever stop. We are one people, one family, and one glorious nation under God. We will make America great again.
Welcome to Team Trump Online. From Washington, D.C., welcome to the 2020 Republican National Convention.
My fellow Americans, tonight, with a heart full of gratitude and boundless optimism, I profoundly accept this nomination for President of the United States.